the unfortunate side of journalism. And I'm glad that Lee's here tonight. Hopefully, we'll get him on so he can speak to this. And this journalist, in response to the story of the alleged Galactic Federation and a presence on Mars of humans and extraterrestrials, this reporter said, "As a respected human journalist, I think I speak for our entire species of only recently sentient bipeds when I say, quote, that's ridiculous. Heim Esched's carbon-based neurological organ is simply malfunctioning as he nears the end of his pitifully short biological life cycle, and there is absolutely no reason to look into his story any further." Lee, how do you feel about that quote?
Well, testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me first?
Perfect.
You know, I did a monologue, or an editorial last week on my show about this, because it seems like people are forgetting what a coincidence that this man, the former Israeli Minister of Defense, he's a retired general, he's a well-known professor, and yet nobody's been comparing him to a man named Paul Hellyer.
Yeah,
who have you? Yeah, okay. About 8 or 9 years ago, he's a man who was also the former defense minister of Canada. He single-handedly brought together all of the armed forces of Canada into one organization, and he was very well known, very, very well liked, very credible man. And then all of a sudden, he started talking about things like, not only are there extraterrestrials, but my sources tell me that there are at least 80 different groups of aliens walking among us right now, that in fact you couldn't really tell one if you happened to walk past them. Well, that might be true in Times Square or on the Las Vegas Strip. I'll give you that, because everybody's an alien, every other person. But why are we not comparing these two individuals, two former ministers of defense, one from Israel, one from Canada, both practically saying the same thing? And why is it that the media is basically saying this guy is getting on in years, and so he must be a raving lunatic? Why is that ridicule attitude the first one that people pounce on? I don't get that.
I just want to jump in for one moment to say, I guess it's about 5 or 6 years ago now. I spent a good part of a weekend with Paul Hellyer, charming, smart, interesting, and then corresponded briefly after, compared notes with other people, and with all respect to him, I think the statements he was making were mentored by somebody in the field who he took particularly seriously, who I don't necessarily, but be that as it may, once again, I think whatever classified information he knows about, holds or held as most significant, that it may have been underscored by somebody who thought it was, on a certain level, cool to be able to hang out with former Secretary of Defense from Canada. And this is purely my point of view, my opinion. But we're too quick sometimes to believe rather than examine, or weigh the evidence, or look for evidence to back up an allegation, even when that allegation comes from a respected source.
Yes, you have to have a healthy dose of skepticism, right? Especially if you're going to be in the public speaking about this. I think, in fact, Peter, you have more of a reason for being that way than I think this other journalist, right? Because that's not their kit and caboodle, right? That's to them, this is a subject they would never normally touch. But it seems to me to be responsible as a journalist, instead of just outright disowning this as having any validity, it seems irresponsible for a journalist, even if it does sound a little bit on the crazier side, considering this past year, and we'll talk about that too.
The other thing, Alan, is in my experience, and as you know, I was really fortunate enough coming up through the ranks, so to say, to work for a good part of my 35-year friendship with Bud Hopkins, arguably the leading figure and certainly pioneer in scientific UFO abduction-related research. And in that time got to assist in several hundred investigations. And at a certain point, and I got into the work, as you know, because of my sister's first talking to me about her experience when we were kids. And I realized at a certain point in working with Bud and my own investigations, the way that I found myself saying it was, I no longer had the luxury of disbelief. And that's when you, if you get to that point, that's when you have to really start being careful, because if you feel you know the phenomena exists, and to quote the Twinings memo is real, well, I forget the famous line right now, but
the famous line is his memo begins. His memo begins with, "The phenomenon is something that is not fictitious. It's real. It's not imaginary. It's not the product of hallucinations. Blah blah blah. We need to study this." So that was 1947.
And more so for, say, an investigator who is an experiencer or an abductee and wants to be taken seriously. If you know, as well as you can know, that what we're talking about is real, you have to be your best skeptic all the time. And with each new investigation, look at it with an eye that says, not, oh my gosh, another amazing UFO case, and jump right in with that as the assumption. But for me, my model is a fictional character, and that's Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, who I just became totally enamored with as a kid. The idea of deductive reasoning, that you methodically go through the evidence beginning with the most mundane, boring, everyday, unexotic, unsexy possibility. And if you look at it from all points and exhaust it and you don't have an answer, then you take one step up to the second most boring possibility. It's not the most exciting way to work. However, you do get to a point where if you've exhausted all the conventional possibilities, that's not only when things get really interesting, but you already know as well as you can that you may really be onto something. So it's so easy in this age of instant gratification, and get right into the hive mind of the internet and take off from there. But there's no substitute for our own common sense, deductive reasoning, and critical thinking.
Yeah,
guilty till proven innocent.
Yes, and the internet and Twitter in particular makes pronunciations and judgments and conclusions without evidence, often just through emoting rather than evaluating. And that's just unfortunate. That's something that we have to permanently navigate from here on in out. That's not going to change, and so it makes it harder for journalists and investigators to get people to listen and take them seriously. Because I'm guilty as anyone else here on Paranormal Now. We have plenty of specious theories and speculative conversations. Absolutely. But I think there's a difference in how one presents it. If you present something openly and as alleged, that's one thing. But I think there's also, unfortunately, a fanatical side to this. And I think the reaction to the fanatical side is an article like this, a journalist like this, right? Because it's so hot. It's so dirty for them. They just don't even want to touch it. And so I can understand that. And there's so much more to talk about. We have so many topics to cover. We barely scratched the surface of 2020, but we have to take this break. So we'll be right back. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRADB.com radio. I will see you on the Inverted Upside Down.